Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second morning of the Grizzly Bear Advisory Council meeting via Zoom and YouTube. Welcome council members and support team and to the public. We had a great meeting yesterday morning where we talked about where we are in terms of process and in terms of how we're going to be working moving forward given COVID-19 and how we can keep the momentum going with this group. This group has certainly accomplished quite a bit in the last couple of months since you first started meeting back in October. And I know that during each monthly meeting, we've had some public who have been able to participate in almost every meeting, and then we have public who are logging in for the first time. So if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We appreciate you logging on. How we'll start this morning is to do a roll call of the council members. For the public, if you haven't been participating in these meetings in the past, what I would encourage you to do is go to the Fish and Wildlife website, fwp.mt.gov/gbac. And there you'll be able to find a brief description of each of our council members, as we won't be doing full introductions today as we did yesterday. So we'll start with introductions and allow for more people to join in, and then I'll give a roadmap for the day and how our next couple of hours will transpire. And I'm just gonna go alphabetically as I've seen people join and written it in. And so if I miss you, we'll come back to you. Annie?
There we go. Good morning. My name is Annie Shusky. I'm in East Glacier Park, Montana, and I work as a guide and expedition leader for 6 months a year, and I work for Browning Public Schools the other 6 to 9 months of the year as an educator. And I'm happy you all could join us via Zoom and YouTube today.
Thanks, Annie. Brett?
I'm Brett Barney. I'm just outside of Wyola, Montana, and I am the range detective, wildlife manager for Sunlight Ranch Company.
Caroline?
Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Bird in Bozeman, Montana. I'm the former executive director of the Greater Yellowstone Coalition and currently a conservation consultant.
And I know Chad Bauer with Republic Services is going to try to join us later on this morning. He's dealing with a number of business issues related to the virus. And Chuck as well is with Timber Company and will also be trying to join us later this morning. Cole?
Good morning, Cole Mannix from live here in Helena, Montana, for family ranches in the Blackfoot Valley of Western Montana.
Don't see Darren yet this morning. We'll give him a couple minutes to see if he joins. Erin?
Good morning, Erin Edge. I'm out of Missoula, Montana, and I work for Defenders of Wildlife, a national nonprofit conservation organization.
Greg Schock, I don't think is going to be able to join us this morning. He's a dairy farmer in the St. Ignatius area. And Heath?
Good morning. My name's Heath Martinell. My family ranches in Southwest Montana. And good morning. Thanks.
Good morning. Jonathan?
Morning. I'm Jonathan Bauer. I'm in Swan Valley, Montana. I work for Swan Valley Connections to promote conservation and education within our communities between the Bob Marshall and Mission Mountain Wilderness.
Cameron?
Good morning, Cameron Kelsey, guest rancher and outfitter in Southwest Montana. Pleasure to be here.
And Kristen Kipp, she's on the Blackfeet Reservation, and she may be joining us later this morning. Lawrence?
Yeah, Lawrence Grossfield. I'm a cattle rancher from Big Timber.
Michelle? Thought I saw Michelle. Are you
here. I'm
okay.
here. Hi, this is Michelle Dietrich. I live in Hamilton, Montana. I'm currently in Ohio. It's not raining today. And I guess that's it. Glad to be here and keep working at this.
Thanks, Michelle. Nick?
Just come on.
Yep.
Good. Hi, I'm Nick Jivak. I work for the Montana Wildlife Federation, and I'm in Helena, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
And Robin, who's up in the Cabinet Yaak area, is not able to join us today. And Trina. Trina, you there? Maybe we'll be able to introduce her. For some reason, we can't hear you now, Trina. Well, Trina Jo Bradley up in Valier on the Rocky Mountain front, and she'll try and troubleshoot here perhaps with Pat to be able to log back on. We heard her earlier. And I'm Heather Stokes, one of the facilitators from the University of Montana with the Center for Natural Resources and Environmental Policy, along with my colleague Shawn Johnson, who facilitated yesterday. And we also have the support team who I see, I hope I've gotten everyone's name. We've got Hillary Cooley, Ken and Charlie and Gary had to step off for the next hour for an FWP call. We've got Sarah Silty on the line taking minutes for us, Craig Glacier from Wildlife Services, Chris Savage from US Forest Service, Vivica Krauser from FWP helping us with communications and monitoring both the YouTube channel and Zoom, and public comments coming in, and Jody Bush, again, Jody and Hillary from US Fish and Wildlife Services. So thank you everyone for being here. For those of you in the public that have participated with us in the past, as you know, we've been doing every attempt that we can to be as inclusive and as engaging as we possibly can. Unfortunately, this format does limit our ability to do this. So what we really encourage you to do is, if you have comments and questions that you'd like to share, please use the FWP Grizzly Bear Advisory Council comment link on that web page. It's unlikely that we'll be able to get to that comment during the meeting today, but council members are monitoring that even more closely, and we'll look at that after the meeting, as will support team members to make sure that your question and comment gets directed to the appropriate person. We did have some comments yesterday where folks were talking about where public was having a little bit of a challenge following the discussion. So in preparing you guys for the discussion today, what has been happening over the course of the last couple of months is that the council members have, well, initially council members really focused on gaining shared knowledge and understanding about the issues that are in the executive order. And so I encourage all public members to go to the website, take a look at the executive order from the governor in terms of what the council charges, what the strategic objectives are, and what the 7 topic areas are that the council is really focusing their discussion and emerging ideas, which will later become recommendations. And in the last couple of months, what the council members have done is randomly broken into 4 working groups. And they've been using the executive order to build out a framework so that they can begin to synthesize all of the discussion that has been happening since October and begin to articulate their emerging ideas around these 7 topic areas for conservation and management of grizzly bears throughout the state. So that's what their discussions have been focusing on. We had questions about, are they focusing on different areas for each working group? And the answer right now is that each working group has been looking at the overall framework in which they'll be writing out their recommendations and what that structure will look like. And so what we'll be doing this morning is really hearing an update from the working groups. They did meet via conference call yesterday afternoon for a couple of hours. And so what we want to do this morning is really hear from the working groups in terms of where they are, what questions they have, and where they want to go from here in terms of their working groups. We did have groups 1 and 2 combine, and so we'll be curious to hear how that went. And again, for the public, just please bear with us as we really hear more about process as opposed to content. And I did just see that Trina's back. Welcome back, Trina. Do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Sure, this is Trina Bradley. I ranch on the southern end of the Blackfeet Reservation, and I am at work at the post office again today, so I will probably get dropped several more times, but I'll try to stay on.
Thanks, Trina. I know you're juggling a lot. Also for the public, what we're doing is for those that are speaking and have video access, we're having people log on to video, but it might be intermittent just so that we can protect the bandwidth. So you'll probably only see those that are speaking, and for those that aren't speaking, will just be available via audio. So I will call on groups 1 and 2 to go ahead and report back on how that process worked out and where you guys are.
Hey, Heather, this is Jonathan. I guess I was elected by my group to report back, and well, we learned a lot through that time, and some of the things that we came together on were trying to move into the process, merging our 2 groups' work that we had done previously, and trying to take the agreements that we were able to reach in our 4-person groups and turn those into 8-person agreements as a step to begin to continue to build common ground that we can use as foundations to move forward. What we really understood was merging these ideas is a little bit more difficult than we thought. It really requires a lot of just honesty on the part of each individual to be able to really truly describe what their approach and meaning behind each idea was. And in doing that, it really helped us to better understand what the spirit of those words entailed. And we did gain some ground on that, but a lot of it was more procedural and just making sure that, you know, we were really hearing each other and listening to achieve clarity, asking questions and being open to the ideas that, you know, while we may be talking and speaking in the same languages, we don't always mean the same things with that. And so we realized that the work that we've done up to this point and that you and Shawn have helped us with has built a tremendous amount of respect for each other. And we need to really lean back on that now and understand that we're going to have some dissenting ideas. We're going to have some dissenting approaches to these things. But we have a really great foundation of interpersonal respect and value for each other's ideas that we can use as kind of a safety net to be able to start to share these harder discussions. We did struggle to move through some of the questions from FWP and also just to understand what we were all meaning by the emerging ideas and recommendations that we've been working on. We needed to really restructure our thoughts quite a bit to move through those struggles And it gave us all the opportunities to reassess what our own positions were on some of these things. And I think in the few areas we were able to discuss as a group, they became more comprehensive and gained clarity. It's going to really help moving through this process when we get to some of those tougher calls, some of those issues we've all been somewhat moving down the line. I think that we've made some progress and have the ability to address those as a group together. It'll help to get some of those more controversial ideas out for us to understand where each other stand on those things and respectfully debate those. I think that's a really important part. And we found that seems like we're ready to do that as a group because of that good foundation that we've been building. To get to that point, we did a lot of reconsidering and backing up. And, you know, at the end of the call, it almost felt like maybe we hadn't made as much progress as we had hoped. But I kind of see it as, well, here in Montana, our springtime and winter tend to kind of combine, and it's kind of like that. It's like we're getting some blizzards that feel like we're set back into winter, but each time we're pushed a little bit farther into that nicer weather. And we were really in that mode with our group. And even though it felt like we were having some big storms holding us back, we definitely are moving forward, getting some fresh ideas out. And that was really nice. We all felt it was important to at least attempt to reschedule our meeting in Shodo. We think that landscape and those communities out there would have been had a lot of value for us to be able to meet with them, to be able to learn about their consideration and their interactions with grizzly bears. I know that it's a lot different than in other parts of the state, and we'd like to put a priority on trying to reschedule that if possible. The working remotely with these kind of conference calls, we're really glad that this is available to us. We're all super impressed at how well it works, especially thinking of how many people are using these technologies right now across the country. But it also slows us down, makes it a little bit harder to interact in the most productive way. And so we're just all a little bit aware that it may cause some challenges in our overall timelines. And we're wondering what consideration maybe has been given to that at some higher levels of thought with the facilitators or others involved, just to be able to have some kind of plan to mitigate the difference of meeting in person via then remotely. We also would really like to learn a bit more. We received a comment online about the management strategies in Kodiak and British Columbia. Those are some areas and communities that have a long history of coexisting with bears and managing them with some successful strategies. And we think we could learn a lot from those. And it was our comment number 281. It was mentioned yesterday, but we'd really like to look further into that. And especially now that we are meeting remotely, it may be more easier to get some of those voices to us rather than having to bring them down for an in-person meeting. While we're separated like this, and we think it's really important to make time to continue having these meetings over the next few months to keep these conversations going and to keep up the momentum that we've made right now. We are kind of on the edge of these more important and difficult discussions, and I think it's just important that we keep moving forward towards those right now. We all felt really positively that our ability to work remotely like this and still continue to progress is a great testament to the group's ability to succeed in this task, although it will add some challenges, but I think we're up to them.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was quite a great summary, quite comprehensive. So let's see if I've caught you. There were really two pieces of this. The first piece really addressing sort of the process and content of where your working group is and how it's been to combine the two working groups, and really being able to identify where you've been able to merge and find some common ground. And then where merging has really brought to light need for additional clarity around language and around ideas, and also really around appreciating the foundation of the relationship development and the trust that's been established so far. So really having had that opportunity since October to get to know each other and respect each other and really be able to understand and hear the perspectives where you're coming from, now being able to have these more difficult conversations around where there might be those tensions and those struggles, and really having that conversation about culture and values, and really wanting to better understand where some of the differences lie. And so I think that's really awesome that you guys got to that point yesterday in your working groups. And thank you for being able to enter into that dialogue and being so aware of where you are in that process, and being able to identify where does additional discussion need to happen around some of these more challenging ideas, or where there's not necessarily agreement. And I'm hoping also that working groups are also starting to identify where there might be some gaps. And so I think with your comment around your two working groups, really still wanting to hear from folks in the Shoto and Browning area and understand that landscape and their experience is noted. And we can talk about that sort of from 10:15 to 11. We've got a roadmap for moving forward, and some of the logistical next steps that we can talk about in terms of how the video process has been going on, and what our work will look like in moving forward. And we can again talk about what the timeline needs to be between now and the deadline for August, and how we maximize our time, and what considerations might need to be given to that. So we can talk about that more. Anyone else from, I'm gonna call it group one, and now there's 8 of you, unless you guys still wanna be seen as group 1 and 2. I'm not sure where you are in terms of combining documents. So anyone else from those two groups? Again, in those two groups, we've got Brett and Caroline, Chuck, Kristen, and Robin, who's group 1, and group 2 is Jonathan, Darren, Cameron, and Cole. So anyone else want to speak from that group? Maybe someone from group 1, Brett or Caroline.
Yeah, I like the process. I think that I think we're ready to combine. It is a struggle. You know, I think the two groups, you know, the 4 of you kind of went through this process, and now we've moved to 8, and 8 of us are going through the same process that the 4 of us went through. Is kind of what it feels like, but I think it's paving the way.
Great, thanks, Brett. Anyone else from those two groups have anything that they want to share in terms of process or content, or where you feel you are that might be helpful for the rest of the council members and support team to hear? All right, we'll move to group 3. Annie, are you still the one to report out, or Erin or Heath or Nick?
Annie has asked me to report out, but I'm actually going to reach out to the other members too. And I can just start with kind of where we got going. So last night we worked for a few hours actually to try and get through all of our different, the different recommendations and discussions. And it was a really good conversation, at least from my perspective. We kind of dug into, can you guys hear me? I'm having some trouble with. Zoom. Okay. So we dug into kind of each topic, and we got through all of the topics that we were going to be discussing, and got some stuff up there. So I know that other groups had completed that before last night. So the other groups are welcome to take a look at that. I know that Heather or Annie was going to get that to Shawn so that that was available. And we went through, we started it back at the beginning, honestly, and kind of dug into each subject. Combining things as we saw fit was really our top priority, to try and pare down what we were looking at and to make sense of it kind of in a more cohesive way. We ended up with about 4 pages, coming back down from 7, I think. And I think the process has been good. I was really, it was really nice to see that we were able to work so effectively over the phone. I don't think it replaces in-person visits at any, by any means, but I think that we were really able to accomplish quite a bit yesterday using this system. And so I appreciate everybody's efforts that have gone into providing this resource for us. And then I guess what I would ask is that each of us talk about a little bit about the process moving forward, as far as we didn't get to the conversation about Shoto and meetings in the future. I guess the one thing I would say about that is that I do think it's important. I wonder if we should be prepared for both allowing the public to have some sort of capability to feel heard virtually as well as in person, just in case this lasts for longer than maybe some of us are expecting. So that was just one thought that came to mind on all of this. Again, recognizing completely that that doesn't replace a in-person meeting by any means, and I recognize that. But I guess we're going to get into some of that this afternoon. So does anybody else from my group kind of want to talk a little bit about the process, and also maybe a little bit about the Shoto meeting, since the previous group touched base, and kind of moving forward?
Well, I'll just jump in here, Erin. I mean, yesterday was productive because as group 3, we needed to have that call anyway. And, I think we're making progress because we're starting to incorporate and look at some of the ideas from the combined groups 1 and 2, and look at, I think we have the sort of genesis of an early draft. So, and as far as Shoto or something, I mean, I don't know, scheduling a meeting at this point is tough, but maybe we can start looking at May or June or something. I mean, I'm throwing that out there to the whole group. So.
Thanks, Nick and Erin. Anyone else from group 3, Annie or Lawrence?
Yep. I would just like to echo, thank you, Erin, for stepping up. Yesterday was very productive for us, combining, consolidating, and kind of getting our ideas into a smaller package. We also took the time to look at the other 3 groups, emerging idea documents, Word documents, and take from those, if we agreed, and find common ground and commonality between those. And so it was really good to see where kind of across the board we have the same ideas or things that'll work for most all of us. And we did start to have some harder discussions about some of these topics that are emotionally sensitive. And so I think it was invaluable. It was important for us to have that time yesterday. I think it was 3.5 hours we met and talked about it. I would like to start having these bigger discussions with a few more people in our group, like group 1 and 2 did, moving forward. I don't know how I feel for planning a meeting in Shoto and Browning right away. I know our school district is still trying to figure out how to move forward and if they're going to open school after the 27th with the governor's recommendation. just because it is such a unique area and living situations for so many people. And there are so many elderly who fill roles of parents and whatnot. And so I just want to make sure we don't rush to have a full public comment here. I truly think it's deeply important, but I also think the health of the community here needs to come first. And so thinking about doing it later on, May, June, sometime down the road, but really being mindful and respectful of how fragile different communities are during this time.
Thanks, Annie. Heath or Lawrence, do either one of you want to add to Group 3's report out?
This is Lawrence. I'll try to. I totally agree about the Shoto Browning meeting, and I'm thinking about the ability to meet face to face with local people. The same is true for Red Lodge and probably all the rest of the areas that we are still going to meet in. We did get into some of the tough issues, but there's a lot more, and those tough issues I think are really better to be dealt with in person somehow, and maybe by, well, I suppose it was suggested maybe we should combine into a bigger group. Maybe 3 and 4 could become a group, and try that for a while. But the problem is that I think of August, and I just sort of feel like we're not going to make it. And it's not because of us as groups or as individuals, but it's because of this whole situation that the world is in right now. And I'm thinking that it's not too early to be talking, maybe even to the governor, about, efforts like this need more time, and we may not be able to meet as a group in person for several months yet. And I think in a tough issue like this, I think it's essential really to be face to face, not only with each other but with various communities. So I'm struggling with that whole part of it. Yeah, that's enough.
Thanks, Lawrence. Heath, did you want to? Yep.
Yeah, I would just kind of reiterate what everybody else has said. I think we had a really good conversation yesterday, and we did get a chance to start talking about some things that we'd gotten on paper and kind of looked at, but we hadn't really had much actual discussion amongst our group, and as far as how we as individuals felt on some of those topics. So it was pretty productive in that regard, I think, for our group. And I would also agree about the meeting in Shoto, kind of what Lawrence is getting at. To me, I think it's crucial for us to go on a field trip up there and see firsthand what people are looking at as far as issues that they're dealing with, and hearing from those public communities. And in that regard, though, I think that we just have to be sensitive to the timing of it. There's not much point in getting in too big of a hurry to try to make decisions on timing yet. It's pretty unpredictable, I would think, at this point. But
Thanks, Heath. Thanks, Group 3. It sounds like you were able to make quite a bit of progress, and thanks for spending the 3.5 hours yesterday to really get through all of the topic issues. And again, for the public, what they're really talking about is addressing the issues and strategic objectives in the executive order that can be found on the Grizzly Bear Advisory Council webpage. on the FWP site. So the executive order is there for all to view in terms of what the council's charge is and the topics that they're focusing on. There have been a couple of references to the questions from FWP, and the support team back in December outlined a few questions that FWP would like the council to address, although it's not solely exclusive to those questions. And for the public who haven't seen those can be found in the December meeting minutes. Shawn, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I just had another comment to make. So Annie noted, or I think maybe Erin noted, that they had done some additional work and wanted to share their progress back with the group. I incorrectly assumed that the notice I got from Annie yesterday was from Google, just saying that people had been working on their document. So I just turned that into a Word document and sent it around to both the council and the support team so that people could see the latest progress from group 3, I'm sorry. And it was attached to the same email link as yesterday afternoon's meeting. So I think the title says that it's the Zoom link for yesterday's afternoon session. But the latest email from me is that update from group 3. So if you didn't get that, let me know, but it should be in your inboxes shortly.
Thanks, Shawn. And thanks, Annie, for making sure that it got out to everyone and shared with the group. So again, thanks group 3 for all the work that you did yesterday afternoon. We'll come back to logistics that everyone keeps bringing up in terms of what will the roadmap look like moving forward. So we'll definitely address that here in a few minutes. I'd like to hear an update in terms of progress and process from group 4, and then we can talk about how groups want to move forward with this particular document sharing and combining. So, and I saw that Chad, you're here. So welcome, Chad. Thanks for being able to join us. So group 4 again is Trina and Michelle and Chad and Greg. Who wants to report out from your group?
One will jump in at once. I'll start and then they can pick up where I left off. How's that? Can you hear me?
Thanks, Trina. Yep.
Okay. So we did some fine tuning yesterday. Basically, I don't have access to the document in my post office, so I just relied on Chad and Michelle to read to me a lot. But I think we got some things figured out. We had a really good discussion with Glazier and Gary and Hillary, and I hope after that discussion we all understand each other a little bit better. I let my passion flare for a little bit, as I normally do, but I hope that no one's feelings got hurt. We are at the point that we are definitely ready to collaborate with the other groups. If 3 wants to join us for the next call or whatever, we're down with that, or we're ready to just talk to the entire group of the council. And as far as a Shadow Browning meeting, I think June would be a really good month for that, because probably we'll be back to normal life by June. And also by that point, everybody is done calving. Almost everybody is done calving up here. And we've all got our cows out to summer pasture. And that way, I think we'd get a lot more public involvement because people aren't super busy in June. So, and that's all I had to say. So Chad and Michelle can take over from there.
Thanks, Trina. Chad or Michelle? Hi, Chad.
Hello. I will just concur with everything that Trina said. I think our group is ready to work with other groups individually or as the council as a whole. We've spent a lot of hours putting this together, and I think, you know, as each group has a really good skeletal pattern, a lot of that stuff is redundant with all of our working documents. It might be helpful to move everything into one document and sit down as an entire group and start hammering things out that need to be talked about, because there are some very tough issues that are going to be coming up.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, well, I just wanted to, same thing, we're ready to move in with another group. We did a little fine tuning on our list. And I wonder if we keep talking about, we need to get together to talk about these big issues, but maybe we should take the elephant out of the room and say, what issues, what are these contentious issues that we want to talk about as a group, as a whole group? I don't know if we're ready to do that, but what are the specific issues we need to discuss? Do we need to discuss what is recovery? Do we need to discuss as a group connectivity? Do we need to discuss as a group hunting? And maybe chunk it out in small pieces. I don't know, we just keep saying we have to get together to talk about these big issues, but we don't even say what the big issues are. And, so if it's mentionable, it's manageable, we can talk about this. So I guess I think either in small groups or as a whole group, or maybe a combination of two. And by the way, I'm sorry, I'm Michelle Dietrich and I'm from Hamilton. Right now, just to let you guys know what's going on in Ohio, because we're a little bit ahead of Montana, not that that's a good thing, but we are in a soft shelter in place for the next 2 weeks in the state of Ohio. And that will probably, I'm guessing, is going to turn into a serious shelter in place. And I'm not sure how long this is going to go on. I would like to try to whittle away at it virtually, as far as at least talking about some of the issues and what we're thinking. I do think we need to get to Shoto and at least see what the layout is and what's going on there. I don't know time constraints, or even if we'll be able to do that. Maybe one thing we could do is start looking at dates that we all have in common that could be coming up. We could go to Shoto instead of Red Lodge. We have that set aside. I mean, I think there's a lot of options that we all need to discuss, but maybe we should start looking at dates where we all have open that we could just have set aside, if at all possible. And that's where we are, I think. And same thing, what Chad and Trina said, that's where we are.
Thanks, Michelle. These are very, very hard and uncertain times. And, I really appreciate each one of you taking the time to continue to work on this. This remains important. It remains priority, as well as everything else that each one of you have going on in your lives in terms of dealing with just needing to be flexible and adaptable to the ever-changing situation day by day, sometimes hour by hour. So I appreciate all of you being here and engaged and working really hard yesterday and coming in and out as you're having to deal with some of the other challenges that are being presented in your life. And certainly there's great consensus and need to talk about how we're going to do this and moving forward. Really wanting also to, I think I'm not going to get it right, Michelle, but what you just said in terms of what's mentionable is manageable, and bringing up the fact that each one of the groups, it's hard to know in this condensed period of time that we're trying to check in and hear how each group went yesterday. How much content do we get into right now, given the time constraints for this 2-hour meeting? It's good to hear that each one of your groups did talk about where there is common ground, being able to clarify some of the language being used, and being able to address where additional discussion needs to happen, where there's different experiences and different opinions and thoughts about what needs to happen, and how do we best address this moving forward in terms of having discussion and being able to identify where there is common ground and where additional discussion needs to happen, and how can we have that additional discussion right now given the in-person constraints, and how do we continue to move this work forward and do as much as we can remotely, and where do we just have to say, and these other discussions will need to wait until we can meet in person. And I don't know if we're quite there yet. I think where we are is continuing to have the discussions that we are having in terms of identifying where there's common ground and what do you need to talk about as a group and how can we best do that using technology right now. So as far as the 3 groups go, what I heard was that for groups 1 and 2, combining yesterday really did start to bring out where there's common ground and starting to have these more difficult conversations. It sounded like those conversations were happening and you were able to identify where additional information is necessary and where time is necessary to have these conversations. Groups 3 and 4 sounds like you really were able to get more into the discussions of how to further synthesize and articulate your ideas. And it's good to hear that you guys are ready to combine. And I think coming back, putting the question back to all of you in terms of next steps with these documents, are you ready for a writing team, as had been talked about a little bit yesterday and in our meeting in Libby, to take a look at, I think we still have 4 documents. I don't know group 1 and 2 if you really combined them yet. I haven't taken a look at that, but are you wanting to be now in 2 big groups to try and do that work yourselves, or are you wanting to have this writing team take a start with trying to combine these documents? What are some of the thoughts from some of you that have been doing some of the writing and looking at each other's documents?
Heather, can I, given how much uncertainty we have now, we do have something of a window here in that our next meeting wasn't scheduled until May. So, I mean, knowing that there's no certainty that we'll even be able to meet then, but hoping we can, maybe we just move that May meeting to Shoto. But yeah, I would say maybe all of the documents that these 4 smaller groups have should be given to a writing team so that before we meet next, we have some type of unified draft. And I don't know if people think it's too early for that or not, but that would give us something really concrete for us all to look at as individuals to start making suggestions, changes, edits, whatever.
So let's sort of talk through that a little bit in terms of, you're right, Nick, we didn't have another in-person meeting scheduled until May. We certainly have a good chunk of time between now and then. It sounds like using the technology that you've had to meet in working groups, whether that's via conference call or via video, has been productive and effective. I do also hear that nothing replaces in person. However, you're really taking advantage of this opportunity. And we can look at continuing to schedule these working group meetings or a writing team meeting in between. And so we can certainly send out a doodle poll to see where people are available in chunks of 2 or 3 hours to continue this work. But my question really goes back to, where are you guys in terms of your working group progress and in terms of the documents, and what do you see as wanting those next steps to be? And Annie, I know you had something to say, and then we'll go to Erin.
I think if we took all 4 of our documents and passed them off to somebody, a writing expert with FWP during this time where we can't meet in person, and give them a week, 2 weeks, a chunk of time, and then to meet in our now designated 2 slightly larger small groups and just start to talk about those over Zoom or over a conference call, could be really quite productive instead of putting off having those hard conversations until we're all together. I do agree we can do it more effectively together, but I think we should take advantage of the technology and that it is working, and that move from small groups to slightly larger to try and kind of see where people are and to hear them better in these small groups.
Thanks, Annie. Erin?
Yeah, I would hesitate to schedule anything in May at this point, just because I am thinking that we may just end up having to reschedule it. So my thoughts on this right now is that it would be great to combine the documents. I think as far as our team goes, and please folks speak up if that's not true, but I think what we found was a lot of repetition. Of course, there are differences, but there was some repetition in it. So if we could get a combined document, and if FWP is willing to help with that, I know we had again mentioned that a little bit at the Libby meeting, and Dylan had said that was I think it was Dylan said that was a possibility, and then give that combined document to maybe, our two separate bigger groups now. And so I'm echoing what Annie's saying, because I think that would allow us to kind of go through each topic as all the groups looked at it, and then at the end of that come together, whether that's virtually or or if we're able to meet at that point. But that's kind of my sense of things right now, because I think it is time to start talking about some of these larger issues. But it seems kind of hard if we're still working on a whole bunch of different documents.
Thanks, Erin. Caroline?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I also think there's a lot of areas where, yeah, there's consensus that we all agree kind of, and then there's areas like Michelle was saying that we don't. And if we could kind of put aside the areas that's like, oh yeah, no, we all kind of agree on a big chunk of stuff, and then that would give us the ability to really get to the difficult stuff. So I'm echoing what's already been said, saying I think that would then clarify too the areas of agreement and the areas that need further discussion.
Thanks, Caroline. Other thoughts or ideas or questions around this?
Heather, I can't raise my hand, but can I talk?
Of course, Trina.
Thank you. I just want to address the meeting. Sorry. April, we didn't have a meeting scheduled, so yeah, I echo the sentiments. If we could get one document for us all to work on, and then maybe have another conference call in April, that would be cool. I do not want to cancel the Red Lodge trip because I think it's equally important to get down there and see what's going on there. And then I really think that June, we didn't have a meeting scheduled because people were busy, but I'm hoping that we can figure out something. And June would be a good time for Shoto. And then, I think that the governor would also understand if we had to extend our deadline a little bit because of these issues, because some things I think we just need to be in person, or it makes communication a lot easier. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Trina. I'm hearing your recommendation for June in Shoto loud and clear. And certainly Shawn and Charlie and I talked yesterday about wanting to send out a doodle poll for a number of possible discussions, and that was really more around meeting virtually at this point, but we can, in doing that, also look at schedules down the line. I have a feeling that it's going to be difficult for folks to commit given how disruptive things have been in the last week or two with this virus, but we can certainly give it a try in terms of how we can look to plan further out. And certainly, folks, please leave on your calendar the Red Lodge and Dylan dates, regardless of whether or not we're able to do those in person. We'll continue to use that time. Brett.
So I think, I guess from my point of view, I think the hardest thing that we still have to address is hunting, and our group, at least, we really would like to listen to those people that have some experience in BC and Kodiak, and if we can do that virtually, get a presentation from them sometime between now and May, I think that would be extremely helpful. I don't want to lose that possibility of listening to what they have to say to help us move forward.
Thanks, Brett. Michelle?
Yeah, I definitely understand the inability or the difficulty of meeting virtually, but I think we should try. And ditto Brett, I'd like to hear a presentation from folks about hunting, different experts. I would like to still hear from the Livestock Loss Board, and I think we can definitely do that virtually. And then discussions, I think we should start trying and then see where we get. And if we come to the point where we just say, we've got to do this in person, then we might have to put things off. I also wanted to make sure that I was clear. I don't want to not go to Red Lodge. I was just thinking, let's just kind of shove everything back and move back and then look for dates where we're available. You know, I think we should keep plugging along. And I think we can try to have these conversations and we can finally say no, but if we don't try, we don't know.
Thanks, Michelle. Erin?
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to make sure, I would really like it if we could set up a webinar with George Edwards to touch base on the Livestock Loss Board and his funding and that kind of thing. I think that would be helpful for some of these conversations around that we're having around specific issues.
Thanks, Erin. We have started to have some of those conversations, and so we can move right into that because it just feels that that's where everyone is right now in terms of what does happen next. How do we continue to move forward? I really appreciate everyone continuing to be really thoughtful and intentional about this process and how we can continue to move forward in a thoughtful and intentional and respectful way and continue to be able to hear everybody and understand perspectives, understand and clarify language that's being used. It sounds like there was a lot of progress made in those virtual groups yesterday. And that's really promising in terms of moving forward and in terms of inviting folks that we had on the schedule for Shoto to talk with you all via webinar, via Zoom. I think when we start to use different words, people get confused. So I'll just say just via video, just like we're doing this meeting today. I did have a conversation with the support team yesterday around how we might be able to do that around the role of hunting, and also had an email exchange with George Edwards last night about his continued interest and ability to talk with you all via video. So both of those conversations are happening, and again, we'll have Charlie or someone from the support team send out a doodle poll to see where schedules will align, and perhaps there's more flexibility given that we're not looking for a day or two at a time, but we're really looking at a couple of hours, and certainly would look at making that available to the public as well. And I think, Erin, it was you who said earlier, you know, we've done, I think, a really good job at keeping the public engaged and included in these conversations. And I realize that on YouTube, it doesn't allow for them to participate in the moment. And we're doing the best we can with trying to figure out how best to navigate this. Just even yesterday, having 30 participants on Zoom with the support team and council members, 5 to 10 people were kicked off yesterday. So that's not really an option for the public, but we'll continue to work with FWP and see if there's a way that we can engage the public in a more interactive way in the moment. I don't know the answer to that right now, but that is something that we'll continue to look into. So with that being said, in terms of wanting to move forward, certainly heard the interest in having presentations over video with the role of hunting, with the Livestock Loss Board, role of hunting from FWP in terms of what the state parameters are and what sideboards already exist and what that role of hunting could look like in terms of within the state of Montana, but also hearing a request for hearing from folks in Kodiak, BC. So we'll continue to connect with people around who in particular and how that might be helpful in continuing to flesh out your emerging ideas and recommendations around that topic. Are there other gaps that your groups found that you wanted to set aside some specific time to talk about as a larger group? Or are you wanting to wait until we've got a writing team? What I have heard from a number of you just now was you're ready for these 4 documents to be combined. What I heard from Michelle and Erin was a request for taking FWP's offer to combine these documents. How about the folks that had talked about wanting to be part of a writing team on the council side? Where do you see yourselves at this point? Are you wanting FWP to start this? Are you guys wanting to start this? Can we have that discussion for a few minutes? I think it was Jonathan and Darren and Michelle. I can't remember who else at this moment.
It was me. This is Erin. Yeah, I think it would be helpful to us to have FWP combine it and then maybe have the writing team look at it again before it goes out to the larger group. But I'd be curious what others think.
Michelle gives a thumbs up. Jonathan, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. I would, well, I still haven't seen Group 3's work. I would really like the opportunity to check that out before it becomes just merged in with some other activities. But other than that, yeah, I think what Erin was saying is a good approach. I think it'd be nice to have staff and some of us council members working on that together just to make sure that we're translating what's really kind of brainstorms into a more formal document. I think it helped to get some of us who were involved in that brainstorming in that process.
Thanks, Jonathan. So, and I saw Caroline a thumbs up. What I'm looking at, if the writing team had someone from each group except Group 1, although Group 1 and 2 have combined yesterday. So, you know, Jonathan, with you being from Group 2 and Erin from Group 3 and Michelle from Group 4, what I heard you say, Jonathan, is wanting to have an opportunity to look at Group 3's work, but that did I also hear you possibly say that perhaps the council writing team with someone from FWP to have that initial conversation to work together on merging a document? Or can you clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I do like the idea of having at least some representation from each of the working groups so that we can just make sure to best translate that combination into a singular document. I think that would help a lot.
Thanks, Jonathan. Does someone from Group 1 want to be a part of that writing group?
I can. This is Caroline.
Thanks, Caroline.
I was just trying to volunteer for that. Yep. And, you know, I haven't talked to the rest of my group, but I am happy to participate in that if that's okay with the rest of my group.
Thumbs up from Brett. Any objections? None. Consensus. Caroline, thank you.
Heather, this is Erin. The writing team had talked about meeting between now and our next meeting. So, you know, I am totally willing to still work through this through April, if other folks are.
Thanks, Erin. Jonathan's a thumbs up. Michelle's a thumbs up. I think that there will be a lot of, you guys are gonna get probably a lot of emails with trying to coordinate these groups in terms of next steps. And so what I'm hearing right now is that we'll send out a doodle poll regarding large group meetings for continued discussion around the role of hunting and the Livestock Loss Board. And then as far as working on this overarching framework and emerging ideas, and again, for the public, this emerging ideas document and overall framework is really back in reference to the executive order that can be found online that will coordinate through FWP and figure out who the best person is. I think there's still some conversation going on internally in terms of who might be best to help support that work. And so we can get that clarified and schedule that call as soon as everyone's schedule aligns. So a doodle poll will go out with that. So it sounds like that's the next step, as opposed to working groups continuing to meet. Are folks okay with that process moving forward, where the writing team starts to combine these 4 documents? And as Shawn mentioned earlier, he did send out working groups 3 documents so that you'll all have access to that. Any other questions or requests around moving this document forward? So in terms of moving forward with a roadmap and a timeline, certainly hearing the concern around now that this is being remote, and how do we ensure that these conversations can continue to happen. I think that we continue to use technology to the best of our capabilities. I think, again, getting these 2 presentations scheduled will bring us back together in the large group here in the next month. We'll try and get that scheduled. So using this time for the rest of March and April, again, sending out a doodle poll to see when might work best for everybody. We'll see in terms of how quickly the writing team will be able to meet and get this document turned around. It would be ideal for that to happen in this next month as well, and how best the writing team can keep the rest of the council and support team apprised of the progress in that. I think determining when those schedules meet, we'll have a better sense of that timeline for council members in terms of schedule. Do you think that that's realistic here within the next 2 to 4 weeks? Michelle.
Hi, Michelle Dietrich from Hamilton. I was wondering just really quickly if you could also do a doodle poll just between the writing group.
Yeah.
So that we can, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Thumbs up from Heath and Caroline. Any other thoughts or questions? I know Charlie, you just joined back in. Folks from FWP had an executive meeting, so they're just coming back into the call, and a recap for those folks joining us and for the public who's joined in. Where we're at right now is that the 4 working groups really used the time yesterday in a quite productive way, identified some common ground areas, identified where there was need for further clarification around language, and identified areas where there's needs to be continued discussion around differing of experiences and opinions, and how to continue to formulate recommendations in some of the more challenging areas. And as we've noted that we haven't really specified those on this call, I think that once we've got where the 4 groups are right now is that they're ready to combine their documents and put a writing team together so that there's a representative from each of the 4 working groups, and to use the support from FWP. And so FWP will identify who that person is. In the next bit, the support team will be meeting after this call, so perhaps we can have a conversation about that. And also, in moving forward, we will send out a doodle poll to schedule a larger group meeting for presentations on the role of hunting and for the livestock loss board. Charlie, as you've just joined, do you have any? I got a thumbs up. All right. Any additional questions or ideas around this?
Heather, this is Lawrence. A couple of things. One is, and Annie can probably speak to this a lot better than I can, but as I understand Kodiak, that's an island, and I think most of the hunting there is strictly by outfitters and guides and that sort of thing. I might be wrong, but it's a very specialized situation. BC would be different, but I'm thinking also Alaska in general, or maybe the area around, I don't know, from Anchorage down to the Kenai Peninsula or something like that, because the hunting in those areas are going to be a lot different than the hunting in Kodiak, I would think. And, hopefully Annie will jump in and talk about that. The other thing I was thinking about is that, we've all sort of touched on, or many of us have touched on the idea that there's a lot of tough issues that we haven't really spent a lot of time on yet, I guess would be a way to put it. And I would guess that list of issues might be different in different council members' minds. I'm wondering if it might be fruitful to maybe ask all the council members to submit their, I don't know, 4 or 5 issues that they see as the toughest, because the tough issues are what's really going to take a lot of time. Hunting being one of them. But I'd like to be sure that we don't, as a council, forget some of the tough issues, since we haven't really talked much about them. We did some on our group 3 yesterday around connectivity, but I don't know. That's my point. Maybe Annie has something else to add on the Alaska thing.
Well, thanks, Lawrence. And I think, to be clear, and I see Caroline, you're here. When we send out a doodle poll, I think there's a couple of next steps in trying to identify how these discussions will unfold. And what we're certainly hearing is a need for the role of hunting in the livestock loss board. Once these documents are combined, we'll be able to see where there's some common ground and where additional discussion is needed. And so when the doodle poll goes out, we'll look at all of the available slots that most people are available, and where we can continue to plug in conversations to address just what you're saying, Lawrence, where those opportunities are for continuing dialogue, where there's that need for that. Caroline.
I just wanted to add to Laurence's comments, not disagree in any way, but I would urge everybody to read the respondent number 281 from Ryan Castle, that gives a really great description of the situation on Kodiak. And Lawrence, when you read that, it will answer some of your questions about the situation on Kodiak. But yes, I think also BC and Alaska as a whole would be great as well. But do read that comment, because it's incredibly informative.
Thanks, Caroline.
And I will just echo, since Lawrence asked me to. I am not a hunting guide specifically in Alaska. I've worked with hunting guides, but mine is more education based. And I think the Ryan Castle or Mr. Castle, that's a great spot to start. I also think, as Caroline said, and Lawrence, to have somebody from mainland Alaska and BC to talk would be great as well. But the document from the gentleman or the comment, excuse me, is a good spot to start.
Thanks, Annie. Charlie?
Yeah, hi, Charlie Sperry, fwp. Heather, I'm sorry when I was off, I had to get off, but did you happen to mention the briefing paper that we're working on related to hunting to kind of at least frame up the start of that conversation with some Montana information?
I did not, so that'd be great if you wanted to do that.
Yeah, so what we're working on right now is the support team is developing a briefing paper that would cover the topic of hunting and a little bit of background information. It kind of puts a little bit of context into the discussion that's nuanced around, you know, our situation in Montana regarding numbers of bears, et cetera. And so we'll have that ready to go. Rich is spearheading that right now, getting that in a format already to send out to the council members, and then also having it available online for the public to look at. And so that may be a useful piece of information to start with. Thanks.
Thanks, Charlie. So Lawrence and Michelle, both of you certainly alluded to what are these challenging issues that these groups keep referring to, but not necessarily identifying in this moment. Do you guys want to start that conversation now to bring those, to name those challenging issues?
I will name one that came up in our group that I wasn't really aware, but the livestock loss multiplier is something that I think we're going to have to talk more about. If that was something yesterday in our group amongst hunting as a big one, but the multiplier in particular was something.
Can you say more about that?
Just, we had some people say, I can't agree with that. I'm not for it. And some people who said it's very helpful. And so we just had the two spectrums. A livestock loss multiplier, from what I understand, is compensation for ranchers and livestock providers to help pay them back for loss due to depredation. It's if they have one confirmed kill, but they're missing 3 other animals or a certain number of others, they get paid back, assuming that predation has happened on those other ones that are still missing. Other people on the committee can explain it better than I can, but I know that came up definitely as a hot topic yesterday.
Thanks, Annie. Does anyone else want to say more about that?
I will just quickly. There is an effort, and Cole can expound on this if he wants to. There already is an effort to get a multiplier established in Montana, and that won't end if the council decides not to recommend a multiplier. But I think moving forward, in order for us to get support for a multiplier, it would help if the council said that we all support one. And sometimes it comes down to people not really understanding how the multiplier would work. So maybe now or in one of our future conversations, Cole or somebody can explain exactly how the multiplier would work and where the funding would come from, etc.
Thanks, Trina. Michelle, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when we start discussing issues like the multiplier, I think before we go into the conversation, especially since we might be doing a lot of it virtually, is to not only say I'm against it, but really understand why you're against it, or same on the other side. If you're for it, really understand why you're for it. Like, what is the underlying thing? Because I think sometimes we just shut down and say, I'm against, and we're not willing to, or we don't really analyze why we're against it. I guess I just want to throw that out. And then, well, I have another topic whenever we get there, so.
Thanks, Michelle. Brett, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, but I think she answered. She kind of said what I was going to say. So.
So I think that's a great point, Michelle, to really, when we do get into these conversations and we can, this is your time, right? So we still have a good 40 minutes to have these discussions if we want to hear more about the underlying either yes or no, or understanding of where people are and around the livestock loss multiplier, and wanted to also be aware that you said you had another topic that you wanted to bring up, Michelle.
Before,
Erin?
can I just, yeah, before we get too far into this, I guess I just hesitate to try and dig into some of these topics now. For instance, I think the presentation by George Edwards could help inform that conversation around a multiplier. So I guess I'm just a little bit hesitant to like go through all the major topics right now, but then kind of go down a rabbit hole of discussing each of those major topics as we start bringing them up. That's all.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and before we leave that topic, this is Cole Mannix. I just wanted to clarify, based on Trina's comments, there is an effort to evaluate the current adequacy of funding for both preventative measures and for compensation in some form or another in Montana, and a multiplier may be one of those. Personally, I don't know yet whether that's the best way to provide compensation and provide funding. What I know is that what we currently have is not close to adequate, even for the existing situation, let alone the future. I just wanted to clarify that, you know, a multiplier is just one of many ways to try to basically accommodate the impacts of living with grizzly bears. So that I agree with Erin that we shouldn't delve into this right now. But I wanted to clarify that about this effort among partners to kind of evaluate what is the best way to keep folks whose businesses are helping keep the landscape whole. What's the best way to keep them whole? Thanks.
Thanks, Cole. That is helpful in terms of being able to clarify that the larger issue is around compensation, and that the livestock loss multiplier may be one way to help with compensation, and really as the council is looking at where management and where compensation needs to happen and what additional ideas are out there. And so certainly when we have that bigger discussion with George Edwards from the Livestock Loss Board, Cole, certainly hearing from you in terms of what those other ideas are in terms of compensation. Caroline?
I think that's really great to know, and it kind of follows along what Erin was saying. There are efforts and studies and papers and information out there that will really help us in our discussions, so that we'll come from a much more informed place. And like with what Cole mentioned, it would be great to know what that timing is, so that we can schedule our discussions around having that information before we really delve into it. So I would find that extremely helpful, both for the hunting issue, like what Charlie mentioned with information and a white paper, and then what Cole just mentioned, and having George Edwards. If we could kind of map that out so that our discussions were based on really good information and thinking, that would be very helpful.
Absolutely. Cole, do you have a timeline? Do you know that timeline, or is that something that you can be in touch with Shawn and I about?
Yeah, this is Cole. I don't know the timeline yet, but I do think it's realistic that that the group of us will have made enough progress by, before the council is done meeting, that, perhaps our discussions could, perhaps we could make a presentation just of the work we've done, so that the council has a chance to hear it and incorporate it into their evaluations.
So wondering if perhaps that can happen when we have George Edwards present and sort of allow for extended period of time, a 2 to 3 hour discussion, so that we can hear sort of what those ideas that you're working on, realizing that it won't be done, but so that there might be able to have simultaneous conversation.
Yeah, I think that, George will do a great job presenting on what currently exists and how that has come to be. My guess is that by the time we talk to George, this working group that's trying to evaluate the adequacy of compensation and look at optimal methods in the future, my guess is that that'll be a little too soon for our group. Okay. But super happy once there's some progress made to present if the council wants that.
Thanks, Cole. Michelle?
I just wanted to throw out in that information, I'd like to know the text, and I've asked for this before, so I don't know if it's in the works, but the text of the multiplier that is in effect in Wyoming.
So certainly having more information to help inform these discussions, which we had planned to do for the meeting this week, and we'll certainly get that on people's calendars here soon after a doodle poll is sent out. And so certainly having some information beforehand to continue to inform the conversations around this, and then moving these 4 documents into one will help further clarify where there's some common ground and maybe some nuanced language that might need to get worked through, in addition to where there's some continued need for discussion around what we're calling these more difficult topic areas, that we can then schedule additional conference calls to have larger group discussion around these areas. It sounds like that's the preferred direction to move. Brett, did you have something to say, or is that for?
Yeah, I agree. I want to come back to that a little bit. I think it's really helpful, or going to be extremely helpful, if we can have some help trying to combine this document. But even though group 1 and group 2 met and talked and kind of came together on some things, it's pretty clear that we're having the same discussions with 8 people that we had with 4 people, and so I think by doing that, we ought to be able to go back to our, whether it's the 8 people, once we have that document together, maybe come back to the 8 people and have those private discussions at a smaller group level rather than doing it in front of 18. I think that would be extremely helpful. I'm excited about trying to get a document together, but I still think we need to have those individual discussions in these meetings, private meetings, rather than doing it all together as one group.
Having fewer people, it sounds like, has been allowing for some deeper conversation, is what I'm hearing you say.
Exactly. Yep. And I think we need to continue to have those. I'm excited about trying to get a document together, but I still think we need to individually work through those difficulties.
Thanks, Brett. Jonathan?
Thanks, Heather. This is Jonathan Bauer, Swan Valley. I agree with Brett on that, and I think the two kind of can move forward simultaneously. The group that works to combine the documents, I think, might help to illuminate some of the areas that maybe we have more agreement on than we think, and also maybe some of those areas that maybe there's not quite as much agreement as we currently hope there is. So I think that, you know, having those small discussions on these controversial topics while also trying to combine some of those more common ground areas, I think the two will help us to identify where we are a little bit better.
Thanks. I see a thumbs up from Erin. Any other thoughts?
This is Lawrence. I agree with that. I also agree with what Erin said a few minutes ago about, you know, now is not the time to jump into these. I think the smaller groups are the better place to go with it, or to start with it. And I think we can be doing that work, like you say, like several have suggested, you know, a couple hours here and a couple hours there over the next couple months or whatever. I think that's probably going to be doable for just 8 people as opposed to the whole council plus all the support team, like in our regular meetings.
Thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, certainly wasn't necessarily looking to dive in unless that was something that you wanted, but really wanting to hear if there were certain topic areas that we needed to have larger group discussion. And certainly we haven't gotten to the role of hunting or the livestock loss board. And so wanted to just reassure folks that we will have that larger presentation discussion. And as the 4 documents come together and there are areas that come up in terms of where there's more discussion needed, and also identifying where there's clarification or gaps in information that might be needed where we hold another presentation sort of thing. But what I'm really hearing from each of you right now is that the opportunity to see these 4 documents come into one, see where there's common ground, see where further discussion is needed, and that discussion really needs to continue to happen in these small working groups to continue to flesh out where the values and experience and culture and issues are differing depending upon where you're coming from, whether it's values or landscape or livelihood, and just continuing to hear those perspectives and to get to know each other and understand those experiences on a deeper level, to then be creative around how do you create recommendations for different areas of the state and for the state as a whole. Jonathan, I see your hand up.
Sorry, I think that was from before.
Okay.
I'll raise my hand. This is Trina.
Hi, Trina.
One more issue, as long as we're writing a list of issues that I think are going to take some discussion, is the distribution of grizzly bears around the state of Montana, because there are some people that think we should have grizzly bears in Miles City and everywhere in Montana, and there's some people that don't even think grizzly bears should be where they are right now. So I think we're really going to have that discussion and figure out where we all stand, and then find our middle ground and see where we can go from there.
Thanks, Trina. I saw a thumbs up from Darren on that. And I think that, you know, what we'll hopefully get a better sense of as sort of this conversation has been happening is whether those things continue to be addressed within small groups, and or if there needs to be further information to help move those discussions forward. And so once we have the working documents pulled into one, I think each of you will be able to see where you might want to say, yeah, let's continue to have these discussions and hash them out in our small group, and let us know when you want to come back together in those discussions in the large group. Michelle.
Yeah, kind of a tag on that. I think one of the things that we haven't really talked about is what is true recovery of the grizzly bear in the state of Montana. We've talked about the bears in Yellowstone, and we've talked about the bears in the NCDE, but we haven't really talked about what does it look like to have a recovered bear in the state of Montana. How does that relate to a recovered bear in the lower 48? And how does that relate to connectivity? I think all those things are looped together, and I think there's some real differing of opinions. I would like to hear more maybe from the specialists about what, and the scientists, what is true recovery? What does that look like? And I'm not sure how to go about that, but I think that's a big discussion.
Thanks, Michelle. And we can certainly look into more specifically, Michelle, what you're looking for and how that information can continue to help move these discussions forward around emerging ideas, and what additional information besides what's already been shared might be helpful to you and the rest of the group. Other thoughts or questions at this point in terms of moving forward?
Yeah, this is Lawrence. In our group 3 yesterday, we talked a little bit about connectivity zones. I mean, if you think about just the northern continental divide ecosystem and the greater Yellowstone, it's a long ways between those two, and especially if you think about, say, from the Montana-Idaho border as far east as you might think about how do we talk about connectivity zones in that whole area? Are we really thinking about zones, or are we really thinking about the whole area? And in our group, well, it was brought up, I think it was Vivica that had those maps with that showed some kind of routes. But we've never talked about that, and in the context of might management be different in different areas between between the recovery zones. In other words, might you have some kind of a management geared toward those routes that were on the map she had, and a different kind of management, you know, a ways away from those routes, and you get into the whole thing of relocating bears. Are we going to do it within the connectivity zones, and is it, or within the area between those ecosystems, and is that going to be close to these connectivity zones or not? I mean, that's something that we haven't really gotten into. Another thing we haven't really gotten into, Trina kind of touched on it, but we really, I mean, once in a while somebody says something about, or Montana, or we read something that says Montana in the context that it might be statewide. Are we really talking about colonization statewide in Montana? And obviously, if we do that and end up with that, then North Dakota, South Dakota, you know, are going to be effective. And what that was one of the points, I think, in the governor's executive order, or maybe it was in the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks list of issues. But where should the distribution be? Should it be encouraged to go all the way to the east end of Montana, or what? And we just haven't talked about that. We haven't talked very much about what does social acceptability mean? you know, Fish, Wildlife and Parks came up with, I think it was them, or maybe it was U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service talking about biologically suitable and socially acceptable. What does that really mean? I mean, not just in a general context, but in different areas. I mean, sure, nobody, I think, would recommend bears in downtown Bozeman or Missoula or whatever. But what does that mean? What does it mean for small towns? What does it mean for Trina's yard? So those are just several of the things that I've been struggling with about how in the world do we how do we approach those things? And we haven't really gotten to the guts of those kinds of issues. So that's just a few that I've been thinking about.
Thanks, Lawrence. Those are issues that have been brought up and certainly needing more discussion. And I appreciate you bringing those up. Charlie, did you want to respond to that?
Oh, I just was just following along. This is Charlie. Following along, you know, the idea that comes to mind, I think somebody already spoke to it, that we've got two discussions we know are going to be important. That's the one we're going to schedule around hunting, and then the one we're going to schedule around compensation, and hearing from George Edwards and Cole and others that are involved in a federal discussion, et cetera. That's those two we know are topics we're going to cover in depth here in the near future. And then the other thought or idea that I heard you guys discuss was that some other ones, I'd even say they're maybe even more detailed than an issue, but more a specific hard question related to an issue or topic that's going to cause a little bit of a pause, if you will, and that those we may be able to surface them better once we have one document to look at, and that we could all be looking at that document and thinking ahead of time, you know, what do we think are the really crux questions that you guys are going to have to grapple with, the toughest of the tough ones. And so once we've got those identified, then we can look out beyond the hunting discussion and beyond the livestock loss discussion, and perhaps set some time aside for those. But that's kind of how I was, just from a 30,000 foot level, thinking about it.
Thanks, Charlie. I mean, that certainly aligns with where my head is going too. I think as we mentioned, distribution and connectivity and socially acceptable, and really there's been mention of it, and part of having council members really start to generate their emerging ideas, which turned into over 100 emerging ideas into those Excel documents, and then taking a step back and looking at how do we put those into an overarching framework, which is what your working groups have been working on over the last month or so, and really looking at how plugging in those emerging ideas into the overall framework, and looking at some of these specifics to see how do we have deeper conversation around connectivity in terms of what some of the ideas and issues are, and does it apply to the entire state, or does it apply to certain regions of the state? And so that gets at what you're saying, Lawrence, in terms of what is socially acceptable, what's biologically suitable, does that apply statewide, how does that impact other interagency and transboundary relationships? And so I'm glad that you're thinking about all of that. And I think those conversations will be easier to have in terms of having something more tangible to talk about, not necessarily easier to have in terms of subject matter, but being able to ground those conversations around some of the emerging ideas once we have this larger document that comes together, and the continued discussion in small groups and as a larger group, bringing those back. Does that make sense to you, Lawrence?
Yeah, it does. I don't know if that's better at the smaller group level to start off with. Yeah, I think it would be. better to delve into some of those things. And I'm sure that once we start down that road, we'll probably have a lot of ideas that need further discussion and investigation, perhaps.
Sure, sure. Well, part of it is, you know, there had been months of discussion and now you guys have been putting things into writing. And so it becomes more tangible to have these discussions. And as I've heard from many of you over the last 2 days, and we've heard this since you guys have started your working groups, that starting these discussions with a smaller number of people has allowed for that discussion to get deeper. And then as that happens, just like happened yesterday, groups 1 and 2 were ready to merge. And so it really sounds like at this point in the process, having those smaller group discussions have been helpful to tease some of this out. We need to lump it back together into one document so that you guys are ready to move from having groups of 4 into groups of 8, and then we can come back together in the larger group. And so that's what I'm really hearing in terms of next steps and process in addressing some of these more sensitive topics. Anyone else want to share thoughts or weigh in or have additional comments around this? We've spent a lot of time today really talking about process and how this has been going. And again, I really want to thank each and every one of you for putting in, again, such thoughtful and hard work. It does take a different kind of energy to do this remotely. And it sounds like a lot of progress was made in the working groups yesterday and really trying to look at the road ahead. And we've, again, been talking about that this morning in terms of what that looks like. And we'll have FWP send out a doodle poll so that we can see when schedules will align, and certainly hopeful now that we're looking for 2 to 3 hour blocks that we'll be able to coordinate those here in the next couple of weeks, including presentations, including getting the role of hunting briefing out that Ken and Rich have been working on, getting that presentation scheduled, getting the livestock loss compensation presentation scheduled, getting the writing group meeting scheduled so that we can combine this document, and also FWP identifying a support person to be a part of that writing group to help combine these 4 documents into one. I want to thank the public again. I know that it's probably been difficult to follow as this has been mostly a process conversation. And it's been difficult that we haven't been able to include you in the moment in terms of comments and questions. I want to thank you for listening in and watching in. And as you've heard, a number of council members reference a couple of comments that have come in over the last couple of weeks. It sounds like we're over 280 as they referenced number 281 comment. There were comments that came in yesterday, so I imagine we're over 300, and council members are looking at those very frequently. Every council member has access to those that are coming in. So if you have questions or comments that you want to share with council members, those are getting to them, and other comments or questions are being monitored also by Vivica Krauser and Dylan Tabish, who are part of the communications team at FWP, and making sure that those comments get to the right person if it needs to be Shawn or I as facilitators or someone else on the support team. So please do use the Grizzly Bear Advisory Council webpage to send in your comments and questions. Any final thoughts from council members or support team here before we end this meeting? Any further reflections from any council members or requests? Charlie.
Yeah, I just want to extend, this is Charlie at FWP. I just want to extend a thank you to the council members. You know, we've known for a long time this was a special group. I think you guys are aware of that too. And just this, look at how many of you are still trying your hardest to take part, everything going on. It just shows what an incredibly passionate group you are. And so from the bottom of my heart and everybody at FWP, and thank you very much. And we very much appreciate it. Very gracious for your work. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. And thank you, Pat Lucetti from FWP for hosting this call and making sure that the technology was working, and another great successful meeting. I'm not aware of anyone being cut off, although Trina's line got dropped once, but it sounds like Trina, you've been able to be here most of the time. So I think technology worked today. So thank you, Pat, for making this possible on your end. And again, thank you to the support team and to every council member for all the hard work that you've been doing. And you'll hear from Shawn and Charlie and I here pretty quickly here in the next couple of days. So with that, we'll adjourn this meeting, and thank you very much for everyone who's been able to participate so thoughtfully and intentionally these last couple of days, and certainly these last several months. Have a good day, everyone, and please stay safe and healthy. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.